Hello, and welcome back to the Evidence Locker. I'm your host, Shay. This week we are covering the case of 15-year-old Martha Moxley. While technically and legally unsolved due to an overturned conviction, I believe the original conviction was just and am basing this Solved Saturday on it. Now keep in mind that is my opinion and not legal. The Martha Moxley case is very interesting as it is a relatively unknown murder tied to the Kennedy family, and I know a lot of people like the drama of the Kennedys. October 30th, 1975 was known as Mischief Night, a night when the local teenagers would go out and play meaningless practical jokes on the neighborhood, such as throwing toilet paper around, knocking over jack-o'-lanterns, or scaring their friends. It was a local tradition and was a lot of fun. Martha lived in the community of Bellhaven in Connecticut. It is known as one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country. Martha Elizabeth Moxley was born August 30th, 1960, to her mom and dad, Dorothy and David Moxley. She was the second child. Martha was described as well liked within her community and was known as a very happy girl. She was said to always be smiling. However, despite her happy-go-lucky persona, she had a very cheeky side to her, which would sometimes get her into trouble, such as being grounded on a particular night, Mischief Night to be exact. On October 30th, 1975, Martha had been grounded and was not supposed to go out and pull pranks with her friends. However, Dorothy, Martha's mom, felt bad that she was being left out of the local festivities and agreed to let her go. However, her grounding would continue the next day. Martha left that evening with a handful of friends. However, her curfew came and went. Martha stopped by the Skakel house with her friends Thomas and Michael Skakel. Thomas Skakel, or Tommy as he was known to friends and family, was allegedly Martha's boyfriend in a non-committal kind of way. They would see each other, but Thomas would still sometimes date other girls. Thomas and Michael were 17 and 15 respectively, and they were the nephews of Ethel Skakel, who was married to Robert F. Kennedy. Even though Bellhaven is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country, the Kennedys were wealthy for that neighborhood, and they were very well known, especially the Skakel family. There were a total of 6 Skakel children, and their house was known as a hangout spot due to their parents often being away and the children being left unsupervised and having access to the booze cabinet. This is because the mother, Anne, died due to cancer in 1973 when Thomas was 15 and Michael was 13, and her husband, Rushton, the head of the family, was a severe alcoholic before she died, and it just spiraled out of control after. Due to this, he had to hire a nanny as well as a cook to ensure the household continued to run smoothly. Due to this, he was often away from home, and the children were left in the care of the household staff. However, wanting to keep their jobs, the staff would basically let the children do whatever they wanted. Allegedly, the staff usually only lasted a few months, and it was a rotating door of nannies and cooks, so the children really had no continuous authority figure in their lives. Michael Skakel began to steal and drink alcohol from his father's cabinet at the age of 13, and he began to invite his friends to join in as well. One thing that kept the siblings divided was Michael had a crush on Martha, his brother's somewhat girlfriend, and the brothers had always butted heads, but this just made it worse. He decided to pursue her at this point as a way to annoy his brother. The last time Martha was seen on October 30th, 1975, she was seen by her best friend Sheila, and she said her and Thomas were falling together behind the fence, and that is a direct quote, near the Skakel family at 9 p.m. Whenever any of her children were away at night, Dorothy would stay up until they got home safe. When Martha hadn't come home by 1 to 2 a.m. that night, she got very worried. Yes, Martha was somewhat rebellious, but she also didn't make her mother worry unnecessarily. She would call her mother if plans changed or if something happened. So at this point, Dorothy began calling Martha's friends, trying to find out where Martha was. The mother of Martha's best friend had been the one to answer Dorothy's call, and she woke up Sheila immediately to try and get some answers. Sheila told Dorothy on the phone that she hadn't seen Martha since 9:30 p.m., and that last she saw her, she was with the Skakel brothers. Around 3:40 to 3:45 a.m., after getting no word from her daughter or any idea of her whereabouts from her daughter's friends and being unable to reach the Skakel home, Dorothy called the police and reported Martha missing. After that call, Dorothy called Sheila back, and Sheila apparently had no concern for Martha's well being and justified her disappearance as a result of mischief night. Dorothy, however, had a gut feeling, call it mother's intuition, and she just knew something was wrong. She sat on the sofa the rest of the night, hoping for her daughter to come home. In the morning, Dorothy called all of Martha's friends again to try and get any information she could about Martha's whereabouts. None of the girls Dorothy called had seen Martha since the previous night, when they were all together at the Skakel family home. Subsequently, Dorothy decided that instead of attempting to phone the Skakels again, she was just going to go over to their house and get her daughter. When she arrived at the Skakel home, Michael Skakel would answer the door and tell Dorothy that he had no clue where Martha was. In a state of desperation, Dorothy noticed a big camper van that was parked in the family's drive and asked Michael if she could check the camper van to see if Martha had fallen asleep in there. Michael agreed, and the camper van was simply another stab in the gut for Dorothy. It was empty, and there was no sign of Martha. Dorothy then headed to her friend Jean's house, which was only a few doors down from the Skakels. When she got there, she asked Jean for help trying to figure out what to do to find Martha. It wasn't like her to run away. At this point, Sheila, Martha's best friend, began to get worried. She knew Martha would not be out this long without telling her where she is. She began to walk around the neighborhood, trying to find her. Maybe she passed out drunk somewhere. Maybe she was still hiding in the Skakel's house and just didn't want to go home. Though Sheila was unable to find any sign of Martha. At this point, she headed over to the Moxley home, and it was there that she made a horrifying discovery. She found Martha lying under a large pine tree, and Sheila knew something was very wrong. Jean and Dorothy immediately went over to Sheila and saw what the matter was. Sheila spotted Jean emerging from her home and ran over to her screaming and crying. She said to call 911 immediately and that Martha was hurt bad. Jean went over to check on Martha and saw that she wasn't just hurt. She was dead, and now she had to break the news to her friend Dorothy that her 15-year-old daughter was not coming home. Martha was found laying face down under the tree in her backyard with her pants around her ankles. She had suffered multiple blunt force trauma wounds to the head and had part of a golf club sticking out of her neck. Investigators discovered that the golf club had been broken into 4 different pieces due to it being used to bludgeon Martha. The force behind the attack shattered the club. Whoever attacked Martha had done so in such a violent manner and with such strength and emotion that the club's metal shaft snapped and caused Martha's skull severe depression fractures. The authorities would discover the handle of the golf club was not present at the crime scene, and they assumed it was the only piece that would have any fingerprints from the suspect. The other three pieces, however, were accounted for. One of those was driven through Martha's neck, and the other two were on the ground near her body. Despite Martha's pants being around her ankles, investigators were unable to determine if sexual assault had occurred. They did, however, discover blood splats on the driveway leading up to the Martha family home, indicating that she had likely been struck by the golf club as she walked up to her front door. It's believed that after being struck in the head, she ran away from the attacker, and they followed her to her eventual resting place under the tree. It's at this point that the Skakel brothers fell under immense suspicion. You see, the golf clubs were custom made and belonged to the Skakel family. However, their dad argued that Thomas and Michael had no involvement, and they often just left golf clubs lying out in the yard, so anyone really could have grabbed them and used them in the murder. Police were able to narrow down their suspects to three main people. Thomas Skakel was obviously at the top of the list. He was the last known person to see Martha alive and was her love interest in a sense, and he had less than a credible alibi. So, suspicions of his involvement were very high. Thomas claimed that he and Martha separated ways around 9:30 to 10 p.m., and he watched her walk off towards her house. He then said that he stayed downstairs in his house and watched the television with Kenneth Littleton, who was the Skakel's new live-in tutor. Initially, this alibi appears to be somewhat solid, but inconsistencies quickly began to show. Sheila, Martha's best friend, had told police she had seen Martha around 9:30 with Thomas near the pool, so how had she been leaving around that time to go home? And when the Skakel's live-in tutor was questioned, he claimed Thomas hadn't actually watched television with him until 10:30 that evening. This left a 30-minute to hour-long gap in the timeline. So where was Thomas during this? Who was next on the list of suspects? He had an obsession with Martha, and he was upset at his brother for dating her. Michael's alibi was that he had been over at a cousin's house watching television at the time of the murder, although his cousin never actually verified his alibi. Third suspect in the murder is the Skakel's live-in tutor, Kenneth Littleton. Kenneth had only started working for the Skakel family the day Martha was murdered, and unbeknownst to Rushton Skakel, who had been the one to hire Kenneth, he had been fired from his previous job after they learned of previous burglary charges on Kenneth's criminal record. He had pleaded guilty to these burglary charges and received a 5-year probational sentence, a sentence that he failed to include on his resume when he applied for the live-in tutor position. At this point, the investigating officers had been unable to uncover any evidence to charge any of the three men, and Rushton Skakel was growing tired of cooperating with the police. Their time had run out. Rushton Skakel halted the police's access to his family and their property on January 22, 1976, and consequently, by the end of 1976, Martha Moxley's murder case grew cold. It wouldn't be for another 15 years that her case would reopen. In 1991, there was a rape trial against William Kennedy Smith, and it brought Martha Moxley's case back into the public eye. Rushton Skakel, as a result of this, became set on trying to put the rumors that his sons were involved to bed, and he hired a private investigator in an attempt to clear the family name. In the report from the private investigator, The Skakel family were assured the investigation would be private and would not be revealed to the public. However, it eventually made its way into the hands of a journalist. Nearly everyone had been asked to sign an NDA, except for one, a young college graduate who was assigned the position of compiling all of the investigators' findings and reports and interviews into a narrative with a timeline of events. This young graduate grew sympathy for Dorothy, who had been living for years with no justice for her daughter. Due to this, the young man reached out to a journalist and gave the journalist the full report. The report was then published. It's alleged that after this publication, the young man was confronted by a Kennedy family representative and forced into signing an NDA so he could not speak further about the report. The report revealed that both the Skakel boys, Thomas and Michael, admitted to lying in their statements to the police about where they were the night of Martha's murder. Thomas revealed that yes, he was home at 9:30 that night, but he didn't go inside to watch TV with Kenneth, the live-in tutor. He had actually caught up with Martha before she got back home and had returned to watch television with Kenneth about 20 to 30 minutes after he claimed to. During that 20 to 30 minutes he was with Martha that he failed to mention to investigators, Thomas claimed to have engaged in consensual sexual acts with Martha before they parted ways and went back home. This places Thomas back at the house around 10 p.m. that evening, which somewhat aligns with Kenneth's accounts of the night. This reduces the likelihood that Kenneth or Thomas had been involved in the murder. The report further detailed that Michael had admitted that he had not been at his cousin's house that evening watching TV as he had previously told police. He had, in fact, been drunkenly stumbling around the neighborhood and found himself at the Moxley family home. Michael then claims he climbed the tree Martha would later be killed under, which provided Michael a vantage point, allowing him to look directly into Martha's bedroom window. He claims to then have masturbated in the tree, imagining Martha sleeping in the bedroom. Once he climbed down from the tree, he went back home. In his own admittance, he placed himself at the scene of the crime. The private detectives concluded it implausible that Michael had been able to simply walk away from the home as he claimed, without walking straight past Martha's body. The report ended by listing Michael Skakel as being the top suspect in Martha's murder. The final report indicated that Thomas hadn't murdered Martha Moxley and that Michael had been highly likely to be the one responsible for her death. The report even suggested that Thomas may have helped his brother move Martha's body after Michael killed her, but it was clear that Thomas's involvement was highly likely to have been limited to just that. When Rushton Skakel read the report, he was shocked by its findings and subsequently handed over $750,000 to the firm and buried the report. And, as Rushton intended, the report remained out of the public eye and hidden away. This allowed the Skakel family to continue with their lives. One of the Skakel brothers ended the life of a bright young woman, and their punishment was continue living a privileged life without anyone knowing. In 1993, Michael Skakel met and married a professional golfer named Margot Sheridan. They met through Margot's uncle, who had been friends with Michael's father, Rushton. In 1998, Michael and Margot had a son, who they named George, and moved to Florida. Michael believed he had gotten away with the murder, but his justice-avoiding life was about to come crumbling down. In June of 1998, the same year that Michael's son was born, a one-man grand jury, which was very rare, was convened by DA Jonathan Benedict to review all the evidence against Michael Skakel. It was determined that there was enough evidence to charge Michael Skakel with Martha Moxley's murder. The very same day that the grand jury made this determination and the warrant was issued, Michael surrendered to police. His bail was posted at $500,000, but with the family he was from, his bail was immediately paid and he was released pending trial. Following his arrest in January of the year 2000, Michael's wife filed for divorce. Margot spoke out through her lawyer stating that, quote, any normal person would be shook up. It's unsettling. Her lawyer also said that Margot had been placed under a gag order that had been obtained by Michael to ensure that Margot couldn't speak out against him. On June 7, 2002, in Norwalk, Connecticut, Michael Skakel was 42 years old. He was found guilty for the murder of 15-year-old Martha Moxley. He was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 20 years. The trial against Michael saw over 40 witnesses being put on stand. A few of the witnesses were former classmates from Michael's reform school that he attended between 1978 and 1980, between the ages of about 17 and 19. The reform school was named Elan School. It was a school in Maine where the wealthy would send their kids when they would be too much for them to handle. However, unknown to the parents, they willingly handed their children over to a nightmare. When the children were in the school, they were subjected to various extremely controversial behavioral therapies and modifications. At one point, there was a fighting ring where children were placed and pitted against each other to be disciplined for bad behavior. A witness in Michael's trial had stated that Michael had told him that he had taken a golf club out of a bag and been running through the woods before blacking out on the night of Martha's murder. Quote, he said he didn't know if he did it. He couldn't remember if he did. Another witness said, quote, I'm going to get away with murder. I'm a Kennedy, end quote, was said to him by Michael shortly after the killing. 11 years later, his case was brought in front of a judge, and on November 21, 2013, Michael was released on parole. He was released with an ankle monitor and forbidden to contact the Moxley family. Michael was released because the judge's ruling that his old lawyer had failed to give him an adequate defense during his trial. This is because his defense lawyer had allegedly been too invested in the media frenzy and celebrity status that had come along with defending a Kennedy relative. When Martha's mother, Dorothy, spoke to a magazine in 2016, years after Michael had been released, she said, it has been 41 years since Martha died. When you gather all this information for such a long time, you get to a point where you put it all together and it just fits. On May 4th, 2018, the Connecticut Supreme Court overturned Michael's conviction, despite protests from the Moxley family and the public who were aware of the case. Because of the overturn of the conviction, this case is legally unsolved. However, a lot of people believe that this is just a Kennedy family cover-up, and Michael was rightly convicted the first time. What do you think? Who do you think killed Martha Moxley all those years ago on Mischief Night? Let me know your thoughts. If you like this podcast, give us a like and a follow and leave a review. It really helps us and it helps me research more cases like this. Join us next week as we open another locker. Stay curious, stay safe.